At 70 years old, I was treated like a ghost in my own house, the very house my late wife and I had built with our own hands from bare ground. They wanted to strip me of everything, but I had a way to make the house itself speak the truth. Before I take you deeper into this story, get comfortable, pour a glass of water or maybe a cup of tea. This is going to be long, and it won't be easy. And I'll ask you this, if your own son and daughter-in-law began to treat you like a burden in the house you built, would you fight for it or would you let it go? Tell me in the comments, because each of us might answer differently. If you enjoy real stories with sharp twists, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let me tell you how I became the ghost in my own house and how I decided to stop drifting. My name is William Harris Bill, to anyone who's ever stepped on my porch. I'm 70 years old, and for most of my life I believed a house could anchor a man. Not because of its market value or the color of the siding, but because of what you pour into it. Time, sweat, laughter, the little arguments that fade into stories. That's what Linda, my wife, always said. A home isn't built with nails and lumber, it's built with love. Linda and I built this colonial on Maple Drive more than 3 decades ago. When we bought the lot, it was nothing but rocks and weeds, a stubborn patch of earth no one else wanted. But Linda had vision. I remember standing with her on that uneven ground, wind whipping her hair across her face while she said, "I can already see it. White siding, green shutters, and a maple tree in the yard." I laughed then because all I saw was dirt. But she was right. She usually was. I worked days at the lumberyard, then hammered nails at night. I framed walls with hands already sore, learned plumbing from manuals, hung doors until the hinges squeaked in harmony. Linda painted trim, held boards steady, and kept a pot of chili simmering for anyone who came to help. Neighbors dropped by, friends offered a hand, and slowly our house rose into something real. The night we finally moved in, there were no curtains, no polished floors. We had a mattress on the floor, a lamp balanced on a crate, and a vase of wildflowers Linda had cut from the roadside. "Now it's home," she whispered, and I believed her. Over the years, that house became the backdrop of our lives. When our son David was born, we brought him home to a nursery that still smelled of fresh paint. His first steps were on the kitchen tile. His first bike ride down Maple Drive ended in scraped knees and Linda running behind with her scarf trailing in the wind. Linda filled the house with traditions: pancakes on Fridays, cocoa on the first snowfall, a summer evening dance in the kitchen whenever the radio found an old song we loved. She taped our grocery lists to the inside of the cabinets, always with a little heart drawn in the corner. She collected ceramic birds from yard sales, lined postcards on the fridge, and saved every school photo of David, even the awkward years. The walls carried it all: scratches by the front door where David dropped his baseball cleats, pencil marks on the doorframe charting his height, a stain on the stairwell carpet where I spilled paint once, which Linda cut into the shape of a heart and left there. "Now it's ours," she said. Imperfections became proof of life. Then came the silence. Linda fell ill one spring, and by autumn she was gone. Cancer doesn't care about promises or traditions. In her final days, I moved a chair by the window so she could see the maple tree she had planted in the yard, now thick and strong. Her voice had grown thin as paper when she told me, "Bill, keep this place alive with love." I promised her. With everything in me, I promised. For years after I tried. I kept the store running, kept the porch swept, cooked dinners too big for one man, and sat in Linda's chair by the window listening to the tick of her clock. The silence pressed down heavier than any roof beam I had ever lifted. Nights were the worst. I'd reach for her side of the bed, then open my eyes to nothing but emptiness. So when David asked if he, Melissa, and little Emily could move in, I said yes before he finished the question. "You shouldn't be alone, Dad," he said. "Emily will bring life back into the house. Melissa promised she'd help with meals." For a moment, I felt relief, like maybe Linda's wish would live on through them. And for a time it did. The house rang again with footsteps, with laughter, with the sound of cartoons on Saturday mornings. Emily ran through every room with the kind of energy only a child can have. She taped her drawings to the fridge next to Linda's old postcards, and I felt something like hope bloom again. David hugged me longer than he had in years. But houses change slowly the way seasons do. You don't notice the first leaf turning brown until the whole tree is autumn. The first thing to disappear was Linda's quilt, the patchwork she sewed from scraps of David's baby clothes, an old Sunday dress, and bits of fabric she found at yard sales. One morning it was folded at the foot of the bed, the next it was gone. "I donated it," Melissa said, when I asked. "It smelled musty." We'll buy something new. Then the pendulum clock, the one Linda wound every Saturday night, the one that chimed off key at noon. One evening, the space on the shelf was empty, packed safely away, Melissa explained. It didn't match the decor. Little by little, the house shed its skin. Family photos came down, replaced with abstract prints in sleek silver frames. The walls, once a warm cream, turned into a shade of gray Melissa called pebble. The mantel that had held our wedding photo now held the television she insisted on. At first, I told myself to stay quiet. Pick your battles, Bill. But silence, I learned, is its own kind of surrender. Each missing piece was another brick in the wall that separated me from the life Linda and I had built. Meals changed too, where once we gathered around the table, now I found dirty plates already rinsed in the sink. We thought you were napping, Melissa would say with a polite smile. Conversation stopped when I walked into rooms. Words slipped into whispers. One evening, Emily tugged at my sleeve. Grandpa Mommy says you forget things. She said it the way children repeat facts they don't understand. My chest tightened. Do you think I forget? I asked gently. She frowned, thought for a moment, and shrugged. Sometimes you're quiet. That was the truth. I was quiet, too quiet. In that quiet, I began to see what Melissa was really doing. It wasn't just refreshing the house. She was refreshing me out of it. To her, I wasn't father or grandfather or man. I was a relic like Linda's quilt, like the clock, like the photos. Something to be boxed up, donated, forgotten. By the time spring came around, I realized I was no longer master of my own house. I was a guest, a shadow, a ghost in the very place I had built with my hands and promised to keep alive with love. I met Linda on a warm July afternoon in 1974. It was at the church picnic, a wide green lawn dotted with blankets and folding chairs, the kind of day where lemonade tasted like gold and kids chased each other until they collapsed in the grass. I was 21, working part-time at the lumberyard, calluses on my hands, and no clue what I wanted out of life, except maybe a paycheck big enough to cover rent. Linda spilled iced tea on my shirt. She gasped, fumbling for napkins, her cheeks turning pink. I'm so sorry, she said, and I laughed because how could I not? The tea was cold, the sun was hot, and she had the kind of smile that dared you to be serious. I told her she could make it up to me with a dance. She agreed. That night we danced barefoot on the grass while someone's uncle played guitar. She laughed at my 2 left feet, but she kept holding my hand. By the end of the evening, I knew I wanted to keep making her laugh for the rest of my life. We married 2 years later in a tiny church with windows that rattled in the wind. My suit was rented, her dress hand-sewn. The reception was pie and coffee in the fellowship hall, but when I looked at Linda across that table, her eyes brighter than any diamond, I thought we had the world. We didn't have much money, but we had plans. Linda clipped coupons, I picked up extra shifts. We saved every dollar we could for a plot of land on Maple Drive. Back then it was nothing but rocks and weeds, a rectangle of stubborn earth no one else wanted. But when we stood there together, wind whipping Linda's hair across her face, she said, I can see it already. Our house. And so it was. I worked the lumberyard by day and hammered nails by night. I learned framing from books and from old carpenters who dropped by to lend advice. Linda held boards steady, painted trim, and kept a pot of chili simmering for whoever was helping. Neighbors came, friends came, and slowly, board by board, our house rose from dirt. I remember the night we finally moved in. The walls weren't all painted. The floors still dusty, but we had a mattress on the floor and a lamp on a crate. Linda set down a vase of wildflowers and said, now it's home. Those early years were lean. The mortgage bid hard, groceries were counted penny by penny, and the hardware store I dreamed of running was just that, a dream. But Linda believed in me. She told me, you build houses with your hands. Why not build a store with them too? So I did. I started small, a rented storefront shelves. Built myself a sign hand-painted by Linda. Harris Hardware. It smelled of sawdust, oil, and promise. Linda worked weekends balancing books while I cut lumber for customers. When David was born in '79, we thought life couldn't get any fuller. He was small, red-faced, loud as a siren, and perfect. We brought him home to the Colonial still smelling of fresh paint. Linda hung a quilt above his crib, and I remember standing in that nursery listening to his cries, thinking, this is what we built it all for. The years ran fast. David's first steps on the kitchen tile, his first home run in the backyard, while Linda clapped loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Summers meant barbecues and sparklers. Winters meant cocoa and firelight. Every wall of that house held echoes of Oos arguments, laughter, apologies, kisses. Linda made the house more than wood and nails. She filled it with rituals, Friday pancake nights, Sunday afternoons spent reading together on the porch swing. She saved every school photo, every Christmas card, every pressed flower Emily ever gave her. Life wasn't perfect. We had bills, we had arguments, we had years when the store barely stayed open. But through it all, Linda's presence turned struggle into story. She had this way of making even mistakes feel like traditions. When I spilled paint on the stairwell carpet, she cut the stain into the shape of a heart and left it there. "Now it's ours," she said. I thought that life would last forever, but forever is shorter than you think. The hardware store grew slowly like everything worth keeping. There were lean years where I patched the roof myself because we couldn't afford a contractor, and winters when Linda clipped every coupon in the paper just to make the Christmas dinner stretch. But we endured, and eventually, Harris Hardware became the kind of place neighbors trusted. Folks came not just for nails or paint, but for advice. Linda kept a tin of cookies at the counter, and kids came in just to see her smile. David grew up in those aisles. He'd push a toy truck between stacks of lumber, trail me as I mixed paint, fall asleep in a lawn chair display. I taught him to drive in the store's delivery van, taught him to sand wood smooth, taught him how to listen more than he spoke. Linda taught him kindness, patience, and the art of finding joy in small things. Every milestone in David's life tied back to the house and the store. His first bike ride down Maple Drive, Linda running behind with her scarf flapping. His high school graduation photo taken on the porch. The summer he left for college, I stood in his empty room, staring at the posters on the wall, trying not to cry. Linda hugged me and whispered, "He'll be back. This house is home." And she was right. He came back for holidays, for summers, for Linda's cooking and my bad jokes. He brought friends, then girlfriends, then finally Melissa. The first time Melissa walked into our house, she smiled wide, her voice sweet as honey. Linda welcomed her with open arms. I wanted to like her for David's sake. I tried. And in those early days I thought maybe I did. She praised the house, said it had character. Linda beamed. But Linda didn't live long enough to see what that praise really meant. When Linda fell ill, it happened fast. One day she was humming while making soup. The next, she was struggling to climb the stairs. The diagnosis came like a storm cloud that never moved. Cancer. Aggressive, unforgiving. I sat by her hospital bed, calloused hands holding hers, trying to memorize every breath. "Bill," she whispered one night, her fingers weak but steady. "Keep this place alive with love." I promised her. I promised with everything I had left. After she passed, the house went silent. I'd wake in the night reaching for her side of the bed. I'd catch myself talking to her in empty rooms. Grief is strange. It makes you hear echoes where there are none, makes the air itself feel heavy. I filled the silence with routine. I opened the store each morning, swept sawdust off the floor, stocked shelves even when customers were few. At night, I sat in Linda's chair by the window, listening to the tick of her clock, the one she wound every Saturday. That sound kept me sane. When David suggested moving in with Melissa and Emily, I thought it was an answer to prayer. "It'll be good for you, Dad," he said. "Emily will bring life back into the house. Melissa can help with meals. You won't be alone." And for a time it worked. Emily's laughter filled the halls again, her toys scattered across the living room, her drawings taped to the fridge. She asked me to tell her stories about when her dad was little, and I did, watching her eyes grow wide. I thought maybe Linda's wish is alive. But slowly the edges blurred. The photos of Linda started disappearing, replaced by Melissa's modern decor. The quilt, the clock, the birds gone. Meals shifted from family dinners to separate plates. Conversations changed too, whispers, half-truths, words that stopped when I entered the room. Melissa's kindness grew thin, her patience thinner. David became quieter, leaning toward her shadow. Emily, sweet innocent Emily, was caught in the middle, repeating words she didn't understand. "Mommy says you forget things, Grandpa." I realized then that Linda's promise had been harder than I imagined. Keeping the house alive with love meant standing guard against those who would strip it of memory. Love wasn't soft, it was a boundary, and I had to decide whether I'd let them turn me into a ghost or whether I'd fight to keep the house breathing with the truth of who we were. That decision would come later, but it began here in the weight of memory, in the echo of Linda's voice, in the promise I had made by her bedside. The change didn't happen because of one big blowout. It happened because of 100 little cuts that bled me slow. The first accident showed up as a smell. At noon on a Tuesday, I walked into the kitchen, and there it was, gas. A thin chemical ribbon under the chives Melissa kept by the sink. I checked the burners. The front right knob was open a hair just enough to hiss. I turned it off and opened the window. Melissa stepped in with a dish towel over her shoulder. "Careful, Bill," she said, like I'd been caught sticking a fork in an outlet. "You really shouldn't cook alone anymore." "I wasn't cooking," I said. She gave me a look that said the truth was whatever she'd already decided it would be. "Of course. Just be careful." That night at dinner, she told David I found the gas on. He didn't even notice. The way she said found made it sound like she had rescued us from a disaster. David's eyes flicked to me, then away. 2 days later, there was water on the stairs, slick as a new penny. Not a big spill, not a broken pipe, just enough to send an old man tumbling if he trusted his feet too much. Emily must have dripped from the bath, Melissa said. The towels by the bathroom were dry. Emily was at an after-school art club. Someone could break a neck, I said. We'll be more careful, she answered, but the we didn't include her. It included me. The third time I went to plug in the coffee maker and the outlet plate in the corner that had a missing screw, the hot tab loose enough to arc if you shoved a plug wrong. I carry a little flathead driver the way some folks carry a pocket knife. I tightened the tab, put in a spare screw from the drawer, tested it. Melissa watched me do it, arms crossed. "It's not safe," she said. "For who?" I asked. "For you," she said, and smiled, and I realized I was no longer a person. I was a problem to be solved. I told myself not to be dramatic. Old houses creak, old men forget. But after the third accident, the coincidental started to look like the intentional. I didn't say anything. I just watched more closely. When you've been a hardware man long enough, you know the difference between a screwdriver left out by mistake and a screwdriver left out like a prop. It would have been easier to blow up, to slam a fist on the table and shout that this was my house, and I knew where every wire ran and every board flexed. But anger is expensive. I couldn't afford it. Instead, I tightened my routines until they squeaked. In the morning, I took my pills at the table, slid the day's lid shut, and wrote the time on a pad. I made coffee, washed the mug, set it on the same drying rack slot every day. I put my keys on the hook by the door wallet in the top drawer, my father's watch in the ceramic dish Linda had bought at a yard sale, and each time I said the objects' names to myself like prayer. Keys, wallet, watch, there. Melissa noticed. "You've gotten particular," she said. "I like things to be where I put them," I said. She laughed lightly. "Oh, I know," and she kept laughing the way you do when the joke is about someone you don't expect to speak up. David tried to keep the peace. Peace in our house meant not naming anything. If I mentioned the gas, he said, "We were all tired that day." When I brought up the stair water, he said, "Kids make messes." If I talked about the outlet screw, he said, "Old houses." We had an entire vocabulary for avoiding the point. I don't know when the whispering began, only that one night I stood in the hallway and realized the kitchen had become a theater whisper room. The duck chase by the pantry carried just enough sound to paint the outline of what was being said. "He was confused about the mail again," Melissa's voice slid along the metal. "I'll handle the bills," David said. "You should. It's too much for him. We owe it to Emily to make a plan." A plan. That word sat like a nail in my shoe. I tested myself at bedtime in the way the doctor once had. Day and date. 3 objects to remember. Count backward by sevens. I fumbled once 86 minus 7 came out too slow, and my heart pounded like I'd failed a test no one else knew I was taking. I did it again until the numbers came like muscle memory. Then I turned off the light and lay awake with the ceiling fan clicking a small rhythm that kept time with a thought I couldn't shake. Sometimes the person you need to outsmart is the one who's decided to treat you like a child. The envelope arrived the following week, manila thick with our address written in Melissa's clean slope. Inside, a set of forms printed from a website with cheerful fonts. Durable power of attorney, life estate agreement, general transfer of interest. Sticky notes flagged the signature lines in electric pink. David set it on the dining table like a host setting down a roast. "Dad, we've been thinking about making things easier," he said. "For everyone. It's just planning. Estate stuff, taxes, college, you know." He gestured toward the living room where Emily was coloring. "College is 10 years away," I said. "Which is why the smart time to plan is now," Melissa said. "You've told us how complicated the property taxes got last year. This would help. We'd take the burden. There's a word that tells you a person has already decided what you are." Burden. I didn't yell. I picked up the top sheet and read. I traced where it led to a future where my house was still mine on paper, but not in practice. To a future where Melissa's voice would come with a legal spine. To a future where I died in my bed and nothing in this place smelled like lemon oil and sawdust anymore because someone had polished the history off it. I set the paper down and tore it in half. The sound was loud as thunder in that gray room. "Dad," David said, voice small. "You can't take it with you," Melissa said, as if she were explaining the weather. "I can make sure it stays where it belongs," I answered. She smiled. "Of course, we just want to help." The next day, I went to the mailbox at the curb and found a letter from the insurance company stuffed under catalogs. "Final notice," it said in red block letters. I opened it right there, leaning on the box. Payment had not been received. The due date was 2 weeks past. I remembered writing that check at the kitchen table, the way the pen scratched, the way the stamp stuck to my thumb. I could picture myself walking it to the door, setting it with the outgoing stack. But the outgoing stack was gone. The red letters on the notice didn't care what I remembered. I walked back up the driveway. Melissa met me on the porch. "Mail?" she asked, as if I might hand it over like a child handing over a homework slip. I held the letter in my palm and watched her eyes flick to the red print, then back to my face with concern arranged on it like a centerpiece. "Something got missed," I said. "It happens," she said. "See, this is what I'm talking about. It's a lot to keep track of." "I kept track," I said. "Of course," she said, and patted my arm the way you pat a dog you're trying to coax off the couch. That evening, Emily wandered into my room with a paper crown glued crooked on her head. "Grandpa, what was the story you told Daddy when he lost his bike?" she asked, climbing into the chair beside mine. I told her about the time David left his Schwinn at the park and insisted it had disappeared when really he'd forgotten where he'd leaned it. She giggled. Then, very carefully, the way a kid says something she has rehearsed, she asked, "What day is it today?" "Thursday," I said. "What's your full name?" "William Harris," I said. "How old are you?" 70, I said. She nodded, mouth pursed like a tiny businesswoman. "Thanks," she said, slid off the chair and ran back down the hall. I sat there with my heart crawling up into my throat because of how gentle the questions had been. There are ways to make a man disappear that don't involve leaving a mark. You just teach the child to gather facts and the adult to misplace them. A week later, I woke to find my pill organizer open and the Monday and Wednesday lid swapped. The Monday compartment was full, the Wednesday one empty. I stared at it until my eyes watered. I knew what I had taken. I knew what day it was. But the plastic lids told a different story. I took the organizer downstairs. "You mixed them up again?" Melissa said, not looking at me. "I didn't," I said. "The lids are wrong." She tilted her head, pity polished to a shine. "It's okay. We all make mistakes." When David came home that night, she held up the organizer like evidence. "See," she said. He looked at it, then at me. "Dad." "I didn't," I said. "Check the prescription sheet." "We don't have to make this a big deal," he said. And that was when I realized a big deal was exactly what he would avoid, until avoiding it hurt more than facing it. The family meeting came on a Sunday. Melissa set out 3 glasses of water as if hydration could make paperwork go down easier. We sat at the dining table that used to hold birthday cakes and now held silence like a centerpiece. Emily was at a friend's house. The TV on the mantel was off, and the blank screen showed us back to ourselves, 3 people avoiding the truth like it might stain. Melissa folded her hands. "We want what's best for everyone," she said. "And what's best is to get ahead of things. No surprises." "I hate surprises," David said, as if the words had just occurred to him. "We talked to a friend," Melissa continued. "She works at a senior living community. They have a waiting list. If we get your name in now, you could choose a really nice apartment. They have trivia nights. People your age." "People my age," I repeated like a man trying out a foreign language. "Bill, this is about safety," she said. "You've always been the one to plan. This is planning." "Planning is what I've done my whole life," I said. "That's why there's a house to plan around." David's hands knotted together on the table. "Dad, we're not trying to push you out," he said. This house is a lot, for all of us." "You mean for you," I said gently. I wasn't angry. I was tired of the way we all pretended the words we used meant different things than they meant. Melissa slid a new stack of papers across the table. "Just read them," she said and smiled. "No pressure." I read. A life estate, handwritten blanks filled in with neat letters. I would retain a right of occupancy to certain rooms, bedroom, bathroom, shared spaces with reasonable access and reasonable time of use. Phrases soft as pillows until you rolled over on them and found the zipper. My right of occupancy would not include the garage, the attic, or the office. Repairs would be decided by household management, a phrase that didn't include my name. I set the papers aside. "No," I said. Melissa kept smiling, which I began to understand is what she does when she's losing. "We can do this the easy way," she said, "or we can get other people involved, doctors, social workers." There it was, the first real edge of the plan. "Get them," I said. I'll make coffee. She blinked. What? Get them, I repeated and pushed back from the table. If I'm unfit, I want to hear it from someone with a license number. David exhaled like a man whose whole body had been holding its breath for months. Let's not escalate, he said, and reached for the papers. We were just trying to be proactive. You were trying to see if I'd sign while you smiled, I said. There's a difference. We didn't sign. We didn't agree on anything except that the salad for dinner needed more dressing. The meeting ended with plates and clenched jaws. But something in me had shifted small, but fixed like a screw nipped just tight enough to stop a rattle. After they went upstairs, I sat alone in the dining room. The chandelier hummed the way old fixtures do when the dimmer isn't quite matched to the bulbs. I listened to that soft electrical throat clear and mapped the ceiling in my mind, the joists, the plaster, the old conduit I'd left dead when we upgraded the service panel. There are 100 places in any house where truth can travel unseen. I don't know how long I sat there remembering the paths behind walls. Long enough for the ice in my water to sink and clink. Long enough to see that if I kept fighting on their field tone pressure paperwork, I would lose by degrees and call it compromise. I needed to make the field mine. Before I went to bed, I checked the front door. I always checked the front door. The deadbolt was set, but the chain lay open. I slid it home. Keys, wallet, watch, there. I thought of the word Melissa had used about the house ours. The way she said it ours included everything that once was mine and everything that might be hers if I sat still long enough. I turned out the light and stood in the dark at the bottom of the stairs, letting my eyes adjust. The outlines of the furniture looked like the old shapes I knew and the new shapes I didn't. In the quiet, I heard something else, my own breath steady, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of heat in the vents, and something that sounded like resolve settling into place. I wasn't a ghost. I was quiet because I was thinking. And in the morning, I began to plan. I woke the next morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. If they thought I was drifting, I'd drift on purpose. I'd let Melissa write her own indictment word by word into the air of this house. All I had to do was give the house ears. The hardware store had taught me more than inventory. It taught me system circuits, low voltage lines, the way light and sound can travel through places most people never notice. I still had boxes of supplies in the garage, old smoke detector shells, RF relays, a pair of cameras, no bigger than a thumb wires coiled neat as snakes. That night when Melissa took Emily upstairs for bedtime stories and David turned on the late news, I stood on a chair in the hall and swapped out the smoke detector by the dining room. The shell I mounted looked identical, but inside was a pinhole lens angled toward the table. A wire ran up through the ceiling into the attic, down a conduit I'd left dormant back in '99, and into a closet in my room. An old router disconnected from any Wi-Fi fed the signal into a solid-state drive. No internet, no cloud, no chance of someone accidentally deleting it. Just a private record. I added another by the kitchen hidden inside a vent cover, a third in the garage rafters. They didn't blink, didn't buzz, didn't reveal themselves. They just watched. I tested the relay 2 small fob in my pocket. One click, the chandelier over the dining table dipped for half a beat. Another click, the porch light blinked once. To Melissa, it would look like old wiring. To me, it was punctuation. The first time I used it, Melissa had just slid another set of papers across the table. The chandelier dipped. She glanced up, frowned. Old wiring, she muttered. Then, as if the interruption had pressed her into honesty, she leaned closer to David. We have to move faster. He's slipping. The camera caught it all. Over the next weeks, I built a ledger, video, files, audio clips, photos of Linda's things buried under Miskey Donate. Each entry stamped with time date proof. It was boring evidence, the kind juries believe, because no one would bother to invent something so dull. Melissa's tactics sharpened. She began coaching Emily. Ask Grandpa what day it is, she whispered loud enough for the hallway. When I answered right, she'd correct Emily anyway. He hesitated. The camera caught her face in the reflection of the microwave lips shaping words Emily parroted back to me. Another time she staged the pill organizer. She swapped lids so it looked like I'd skipped doses. I carried my own organizer in my pocket, the one Emily had decorated with stickers. When she confronted me, Bill, you mixed these up again, I pulled mine out. Dates matching the prescription sheet. For the first time, her smile cracked. That night I heard her in the kitchen with David. If we wait much longer, he'll lock us out. Lock them out of what, my own house or their own scheme. David's silence was worse than her words. Silence meant permission. I didn't confront him, not yet. Sometimes the only way to save someone is to show them the whole picture at once so they can't explain it away piece by piece. Meanwhile, I kept being the ghost, quiet, forgetful when it suited me. I let Melissa pat my arm and say, "We'll handle this, Bill." I let David believe she was easing his burden. But at night I sat in my room watching the recordings, labeling each one with block letters on sticky notes. Gas, stairs, outlet, mail, pills, whispers. I spoke to Linda as I did it. "You said keep the house alive with love," I whispered. "Well, love looks like this now. Boring records, quiet patience, proof no one can erase." I wasn't haunting anyone, I was documenting, and the house was on my side. Nights became my confession booth. After the house quieted, Melissa and David upstairs. Emily asleep with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. I'd sit in the small chair by my dresser, set the old camcorder on its tripod, and press record. I didn't plan to leave tapes behind. I wasn't making a legacy. I was just talking. To Linda mostly. To myself. To the silence that pressed in if I didn't give it shape. "Linda, I'd say looking into the cheap lens, they think I'm slipping. Maybe I am. Maybe I've forgotten things, but not the things that matter. I remember your voice. I remember the way you stood in the yard and said this house was ours. I remember promising you I'd keep it alive with love. That promise is the only thing I can't misplace." The words spilled easier on camera than they ever could across the dinner table. With Melissa, every sentence became evidence for her case. With David, every question sounded like doubt. With Emily, every word risked scaring her. But here in the quiet red blink of a recording light, I could be honest. I admitted something I hadn't let myself say out loud. I had let them call me a ghost on purpose. A ghost goes unnoticed. A ghost drifts at the edges. A ghost doesn't get asked to sign papers, doesn't get invited to family planning talks, doesn't draw attention when conversations stop the moment he enters the room. A ghost is safe because no one bothers to fight a ghost. And that gave me what I needed: time. Time to listen, time to watch, time to turn silence into evidence. But there were nights I asked the camcorder questions I couldn't answer. Is this what love looks like? Linda, you told me to keep the house alive with it. Is hiding cameras. Love is letting our granddaughter be coached into thinking I'm confused. Love, am I crossing a line you never meant me to cross? I stared at myself on the tiny flip-out screen. My shoulders stooped, my hair white, my eyes tired but steady. Maybe I whispered, but some lines are fences, and fences keep what matters safe. Other nights I walked the house with no camera, just my hand tracing the walls I'd framed. The drywall was cool. The studs behind it solid pine I'd hauled myself. I remembered every creak, every uneven seam. I remembered Linda painting the trim in the living room, a streak of green on her cheek. I remembered David's height marks penciled into the kitchen door frame, each line a year of our life. Those memories pressed back against the loneliness. They reminded me I wasn't crazy. This house was proof of love made solid. Melissa's gray paint couldn't scrub it out. Still, the loneliness gnawed. Some evenings I'd hear Melissa laughing with David downstairs, glasses clinking, their voices warm with conspiracy. I'd sit on the edge of my bed staring at the carpet and wonder if I had already lost not just the house but the boy I'd raised, the family I thought I still had. I asked myself if I was becoming paranoid, inventing patterns out of coincidence. Then I'd open the closet, play a clip, Melissa whispering, "If we wait much longer, he'll lock us out." And I'd know I wasn't inventing anything. The evidence didn't lie. The strangest thing was how calm I became. Once you start recording, you don't need to argue. You don't need to shout or prove yourself in the moment. You just gather. You let people show who they are. Maybe that's why I started sleeping better. The fear that used to chase me around the house at night gave way to a steadier rhythm. Keys, wallet, watch, there. The rituals grounded me. I realized that being called a ghost had freed me. Melissa wanted me invisible. Fine, I'd be invisible. But I'd use that invisibility to shine a light so bright she couldn't hide when the time came. And somewhere in that reflection I felt Linda near, not as a phantom, but as memory, the weight of her hand on my arm when I almost sold the store during a hard year. The sound of her voice reminding me that love doesn't mean surrender, it means showing up. I whispered into the camcorder, "I'm showing up, Linda, just not the way they think." By then I had stopped questioning whether I was right to do what I was doing. The only question left was when. When to let the truth out, when to stop being a ghost and become a man again. The answer came clearer each night, soon. The decision came one gray morning in late March. I woke to find a fresh envelope on the table, Melissa's handwriting neat as always. Signed for Emily's future. The label read, "Cheerful as a gift tag." I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew what was inside, another attempt to chip away at my place, another quiet erasure wrapped in good intentions. I sat with my coffee, the mug warm against my palms, and thought of Linda. She hadn't asked me to be quiet. She hadn't asked me to surrender. She had asked me to keep the house alive with love. And love, I realized, is sometimes a boundary you draw so others can't trample what matters. So I called Tom Jenkins. Tom had been our family lawyer for years, steady, practical, a man who wore corduroy jackets and never hurried unless he was late to his kid's soccer game. When Linda died, Tom handled the estate. He knew our history. More importantly, he knew me. We met in his office downtown. He shook my hand, eyes narrowing as he studied my face. "Bill," he said, "you look like a man with something heavy on his back." I told him everything. Not every detail he didn't need to know about the relay switches or the hidden cameras, but enough. The staged accidents, the missing heirlooms, the paperwork slid under my nose, Melissa's whispers, David's silence. Tom listened without interrupting the way good lawyers do. When I finished, he tapped his pen against a yellow pad. "Do you have proof?" "Yes," I said. "Enough." He didn't ask to see it. "Not yet." "Then let's make sure the law is on your side." We drafted a new will. Plain, clear, unbreakable. The house would pass into a trust for Emily upon my death, untouchable until she turned 25. No sale, no management decisions, no quick transfers. Tom would serve as trustee. We updated my powers of attorney. Medical and financial control, should I ever need it, would go not to David, not to Melissa, but to Tom. A man outside the walls, objective, immune to household whispers. Bill, Tom said carefully, "This will cause tension." "It already has tension," I said. "This gives it direction." When I left his office, I felt taller, not younger. My knees still ached, my back still stiff, but taller in spirit. I had turned Melissa's script upside down. She wanted to paint me as confused. Instead, I had been deliberate. She wanted me isolated. Instead, I had allies. The question then was timing. When to reveal what I knew. When to turn the ghost into a witness. The answer arrived almost on its own, Emily's birthday. 8 years old. The house would be full of neighbors, friends, family. Balloons tied to the porch rail, cupcakes stacked on the kitchen counter, the smell of hot dogs and hamburgers drifting across Maple Drive. There would be laughter, music, noise. In noise, truth can land heavier because silence follows it like a drumbeat. I began preparing weeks in advance, not with speeches, not with arguments, but with small, steady acts. I mowed the lawn, trimmed the hedges, painted the porch rail. I baked Linda's lemon cake twice, just to make sure I still had the recipe right. I strung lights in the backyard, the same ones Linda used to love, bulbs glowing warm against the twilight. Melissa, thinking she had me where she wanted me, became bolder. She laid out another envelope the week before the party, this one labeled Household Agreement. I slid it into the drawer without a word. She didn't notice the small smile on my lips. The night before the party, I set the stage. In the living room above the mantel, where our wedding photo once hung, now sat the television Melissa insisted on. I slid a small HDMI stick into its port. It connected not to the internet, not to the cable box, but to the drive in my closet, my archive of recordings. I tested the fob in my pocket. One press, the TV would wake and play. I rehearsed in my mind not the words but the feeling. Calm, steady, undeniable. No theatrics, no shouting, just evidence, plain and boring, the kind of boring that destroys excuses. That night, alone in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and whispered to Linda, "Tomorrow, love becomes a fence. Tomorrow, I stop being a ghost." I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, I slept without waking to check the locks. The day of Emily's birthday dawned bright, the kind of spring morning Linda would have called cake weather. I woke early, brewed coffee, and frosted the lemon cake I'd baked from her old recipe card. Butter stains still smudged the paper, her handwriting looping across the page like a blessing. By noon, the yard was alive. Balloons tied to the porch rail bobbed in the breeze. Neighbors carried in bowls of salad and crock-pots. My sister Ruth hugged me so tight my ribs creaked. David flipped hot dogs on the grill, pretending everything was normal. Melissa flitted between guests with a hostess's smile polished to perfection. Emily ran across the grass, crown of paper daisies on her head, kite string clutched in her hand. She laughed the way children do when they still believe the world is safe. I promised myself then and there I'd keep it safe for her. After happy birthday and a round of applause, I cut the first slice of lemon cake. Plates clattered, forks dug in. The chatter of neighbors filled the living room. That's when Melissa tapped a spoon against a glass. The ringing hush fell like a curtain. Just a quick word, she said, smiling wide. We want to make sure Emily's future is secure. Bill, we brought a few simple papers, just housekeeping, nothing serious. If you could sign quickly, we'll all get back to cake. She slid a manila envelope toward me right there in front of friends and family. Polite smiles circled the room. Guests shifted in their chairs, glad it wasn't their business, but unable to look away. David kept his eyes on the floor. I glanced at Emily Kite, still in her hand, frosting on her chin. Before we sign, I said evenly, I want to show Emily something. I pressed the fob in my pocket. The TV above the mantel flickered to life. The room dimmed. On-screen time-stamped video of Melissa in our kitchen slipping Linda's clock into a garage cabinet. Another clip, her whispering to Emily. Ask Grandpa what day it is, then correcting the child even when I answered right. Another, her voice low to David. If we wait much longer, he'll lock us out. No edits, no music, just the raw sound of a house being dismantled around me. The room froze. Forks halted mid-air. Ruth pressed a hand to her mouth. David's boss stepped back as if he'd wandered into a board meeting gone wrong. Melissa's smile cracked, then reformed in panic. This is out of context, she sputtered. He's confused. He set this up. Yes, I said calmly. I set up cameras in my own home because you asked me to sign things I shouldn't, and you staged accidents to make me look unfit. That's not confusion. That's context. David finally looked up, his mouth opening, but no words came. From the back, Tom Jenkins, invited for cake, cleared his throat. You might want to hear the rest, he said to the room. I pressed the fob again. Twist 1 was done. The video had spoken. Twist 2 appeared now, a PDF summary of my new will, plain as daylight. On screen in bold letters, the residence on Maple Drive shall pass into a trust for Emily Harris upon my death. No sale permitted before age 25. Trustee Thomas Jenkins. Gasps rippled. Neighbors exchanged looks. Ruth's eyes shone with relief. Emily leaned against my side, clutching my sleeve without understanding, only sensing that something important had shifted. I invited you all for cake, I told the room, and so there'd be witnesses to a choice. Melissa, David, you can stop now. Linda's things come back out. You stop calling me a ghost. You stop putting papers in front of me in front of my granddaughter. Or we can go to court and the rest of the footage can do what footage does. Silence thickened. A neighbor coughed. Someone set down a glass too hard. Melissa's voice shook, anger laced with fear. You're humiliating us. You did that yourselves, I answered gently. I just turned on the TV. David looked at Emily, then at me. His hand hovered over the envelope Melissa had pushed across the table. Slowly, he pulled it back toward himself, folding it closed. His face carried the weight of a man realizing there are rooms you cannot stand in and still call yourself a father. The party didn't end so much as unravel. Guests offered polite hugs, mumbled goodbyes, eyes wide with the story they'd carry home. Ruth squeezed my shoulder. Tom shook my hand firm. When the door shut at last, I turned off the TV. The house fell back into itself. Just walls, studs, drywall, and a reflection in dark glass, an old man holding his granddaughter. Both of us tired, both of us safe, both of us alive in a house that had just spoken louder than any ghost. That's where I'll leave you tonight. If your own family tried to push you out of the home you built with your own hands, would you expose them in front of friends and neighbors the way I did? Or would you keep it private? Where's your line? When does patience stop being love and start being surrender? Tell me in the comments, because I know everyone carries their own version of this story. And while you think about that, take care of yourself. Drink some water. Rest well tonight. Hold the people who truly see you close, because not everyone does. If this story spoke to you, tap like, subscribe, and share it so more people can hear it. I'll be back with another real messy human tale. Until then, sleep well, and remember, ghosts only win if you let them. Thank you for watching.